Eloise on Rima and famous for. It is just on 11:07. Another Wednesday, another panel discussion. Eloise Packham, my co-host. Are you getting used to this yet, Eloise?
Yeah, this is our fifth one.
Fifth one. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah.
Now, really appreciate the hospitality from Life FM because I'm kind of in your space and in your show. So thank you for extending the invitation to me and guests for some really important conversations as we head towards the election. Today is perhaps one of the more controversial ones, certainly expecting some people commenting on social media as we get the panel underway.
Yeah, we are live on Facebook, on the Life FM and Rima Facebook page right now, as well as the Life FM YouTube channel. So you can join us there. You can watch this as it happens and leave a comment or a question as well.
Now, the topic today, we are looking at the End of Life Choice Act, and in particular, the referenda. All of us get to have a say as a part of the election process, a yes or a no to, well, taking this act and making it binding upon the population. There has been much debate over many years, in fact, on this particular topic. There has been a record number of select committee submissions, and it was hotly debated in Parliament. At the end of the day, though, it is up to us as to whether or not this act, which has already passed into law, goes live, as it were, as a result of this referenda. Now, this is also an emotive topic and one which we are attempting to have a civil conversation about. Eloise, to be fair, we've had some pretty strong opinions already on Facebook. You'll try and filter some of those out, and we'll be civil about it. But I'm sure that my guests today will be civil. Joining me is Henoch Kloosterboer. He is Chairperson and Campaign Manager for Votesafe.nz. Henoch, kia ora, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.
And to be fair to say, Votesafe.nz, you are not in favour of the End of Life Choice Act. That is your position?
That's correct. So we're neutral on assisted dying in general, but we're specifically opposed to this act just due to the lack of safeguards.
Now, also joining us by Zoom is Dr. Jack Havill. Now, Jack is a retired intensive care medicine specialist, more than 30 years' experience of, well, watching people die associated with critical illness. He's also past president of the End of Life Choice Society. Jack, kia ora, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you.
From your point of view, obviously, as past president of the End of Life Choice Society, you're a vote yes man, as it were. You are in favour of the Act as it stands. You would like to see this this piece of legislation be binding upon the population?
Yes, I think it's a very restrained act. I personally would like to see it go a bit further, but it's a good start.
We will get into some of the details of that as well, but also wanting to welcome our final panellist, Caralise Trayes. She is a journalist and author. Her book, The Final Choice, attempted to straddle what we're attempting to straddle today, to get various viewpoints on a very contentious issue. As a journalist trying to be open-minded, Caralise, you have a personal opinion. You tried to push that to one side as you were researching for the book?
Absolutely, and as you mentioned, absolutely trying to put aside any personal opinion, approaching this topic from a journalistic method. So that's really listening to those in favour and those in opposition, and spending hours with each individual, both experts and those with personal stories, looking at the key elements and driving factors we're facing.
Well, we certainly appreciate your comment as well. We will get into the discussion in just a moment. But really encouraging people to, if you're listening to this on Rima or Life FM, do check out the live stream because, I mean, we're all dressed up. Come on. I mean, radio's great. I'm not against radio. I've been doing it for years, but people can watch us. I mean, you've gone to some effort, Eloise. People should check out what she's wearing, okay?
We have Isaac who's joined us saying, kia ora people, good to join you once again. So must be a regular of listening to the panel.
That's very good indeed. Make sure you join Isaac and others. We'll have some questions from people watching the stream. We'll put those to the panellists as well, but back with more in just a moment. Kia ora and welcome to the live stream. So that was the first break of it. We are continuing to broadcast live behind the scenes even during the ad breaks. So for our panellists, We are not live at this point on air, but we are part of the live stream, so we need to keep that civil conversation thing happening.
Kia ora.
It's the moment to drop the book.
Oh, okay. Well,
It's the ad break.
Well, it
Come
is the
on.
ad break, and I mean, I suppose you've written the book, and this is a good time to sell the book after the referendum's happened. That it'll be sort of, well, that was an interesting point of history, I suppose. Now's the time to sell a book,
it's
right?
It's a historic documentation, but you know what? Regardless of what we vote, there are still these underlying issues. There's an understanding, and we need to understand what the cautions are on this law. So I still think it's a good one.
Caralise, I think we need to do balance and fairness on this one. Jack, you've got a beautiful painting behind you of your wife. Just wanting to say, look, if you wanted to put in a plug for your artistic services, you know, for people, can they commission portraits from you? I mean, if Caralise gets a plug for a book, it's only fair, Jack.
I can't see the others at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. We can hear you, and people watching the live stream can see you, but you can't see us. We don't have a two-way camera situation. But you can watch the stream later and see what we look like. I know it's not quite the same, but appreciate that. You got anything you're selling, Henoch, or no?
Well, hopefully people would have received. Which camera do I show? This one over
Well,
here?
no. So we don't want the full information.
No,
mate.
okay. Hopefully people will receive this in their mailbox over the last couple of weeks, which is just an informational flyer from the campaign as well.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So, Eloise, thank you for changing the mic settings. We are back again in about 30 seconds.
You're going to be on your toes.
You've got to be on your toes. Sorry about that. Jack, coming to the end of the commercial break, we're back live in 30 seconds. And Jack, you will get the first question in this break.
There we go.
Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
You are with the panel, Andrew Urquhart and Eloise Packham, hosting a conversation on End of Life Choice Act, and well, we're talking rules of engagement beforehand on this one. I suppose the extreme positions, and this is where we're not going to go, there is a view that says, well, people who are in support of euthanasia, they just want to kill us all. The opposite one, of course, is that euthanasia detractors want to torture us all. We are going to neither of those extremes, and we're wanting to sit somewhere in the middle. The reality, though, as I see it, is that there are a range of points of view in both camps, and we'll get to some of those during the panel. But I personally believe that the vast majority of people who are deeply committed and have an emotional connection with this issue are genuinely trying to address the problem of dying in pain and or fear and the loss of dignity before death. Jack, with your experience, 30 years experience in the medical field, you will have observed a lot of people who have died of critical illness. That's correct?
Yes, it's quite common. You have people who, most people get better, of course, but you do see a lot of death over the years. And some of them, I remember some of them, you're always worried about when you're treating people for head trauma and lots of things like that, whether you're going to produce somebody who wants to live at the end of it.
Yeah.
But, and the other things is sometimes you get presented with patients who are resuscitated and they come to you and they would rather not have been resuscitated. And so there's all that in the background of intensive care.
Well, your experience in the medical field, though, is that what has led to the views that you have on the End of Life Choice Act?
That, and also seeing friends who've died horribly. And also David Barber and myself looked at all the submissions to the Health Select Committee. That was Marion Street's bill.
Yep.
And they were repeated in the first 1,000 submissions out of, I think there were 16 or 17,000. There were about 40 very bad deaths described by of various sorts, described by the relatives, those loved ones who were left, and also doctors.
Caralise, just wanting to bring you on this one because there's different motivators for where people get to their view on this space. It is an emotive and contentious topic. A lot of people have stories of loved ones who have suffered and died. They have been part of that process. And I know on both sides of the debate, there are people who that experience has led them to that conclusion. As you did the research for the book, you must have heard quite a few of those stories.
Yeah, there's a vast array. I think it's just good to know that every single one of us bring our own personal experiences, things that we've seen happen, and the questions we have, the care that we want to ensure that people don't have to suffer. So, yeah, there's absolutely that at play when we approach this vote. I mean, I just keep coming back to the fact, though, that, look, there is suffering. We need to look at how we're responding to that. But with this vote that we're going to make, we're actually looking at a very specific piece of legislation.
Yep.
And is this one going to do the job? Is this going to relieve the suffering that we hope that it will? And so that's what our job is as voters, yes, to look at the things at play, the situations and scenarios, and to assess, will this relieve that suffering, and will it do it in a safe and a good way?
There's so much of a gap, I suppose, between the various sides of this debate. Henoch, would you agree that there is this middle ground that people just want to care for and show compassion to people who are suffering?
100%. I think everyone on every side of this conversation is advocating for compassion and for suffering to be relieved. What we're not necessarily understanding is the actual implications of this law, but not only that, our research has shown that the majority of people, A, don't realise that this is a binding referendum, and B, they don't realise that this law isn't about the already available choices, such as turning off life support, do not resuscitate orders, palliative medication that might hasten death, and those sorts of treatments. So that those are already legal options that we've got available.
Jack, just wanting to if you could help me on some of the definitions there, because there's some emotion even in the terms. It is the End of Life Choice Act, but for some people they would say that's a bit of a euphemism. However, assisted suicide is very emotionally charged in the opposite direction. What would be the term that you would say holds the middle ground as an accurate description of what the Act is saying without some of that either euphemistic or emotionally charged wording?
Medically assisted dying is, or medical aid in dying. I think that's what I'd say. For instance, as you say, suicide, assisted dying, people want to live, they don't want to die. They're just dying anyway, and they're trying to control how they die. And it's nothing like suicide, irrational suicide anyway. You can argue about terms, but irrational suicide, the person just wants to die and they're mentally ill and they do it.
So the medical aspect, it is assisted dying, but it is medical, and I suppose the other important aspect, which we'd all agree on, that it is voluntary. This isn't something which is done to somebody against their wishes.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's actually asked for, and the person's got to be competent, and they know what they're doing, knowing what they're asking for, and just going through very carefully. And explain to them, and it's more like a medical procedure than suicide, for instance.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, I agree with Jack. There is some confusion on the terminology. Just to clarify, assisted dying is the term that has been given the legislation. It's the all-encompassing title, but within that there's those two methods, and that's where a lot of people don't understand. There's the method of euthanasia or voluntary euthanasia. That's where the doctor directly administers that final dose, and then there's assisted suicide, which is the term over the application, a method where the patient themselves takes that, usually it's a drink, but the medication within the drink. So there are a lot of terms, there's a lot of confusion at play in the general public discussion.
Henoch, would you agree assisted dying is a neutral way of being able to talk about? That's a term that you'd be happy with?
100%. Like, I think if we had an act in front of us called the Assisted Dying Act, the public would actually know what the act is about. The reason why we've got more than well over 50% of people not realising that it is about the administration of a lethal dose that will deliberately end a person's life is because of that end-of-life choice. We think of other end-of-life choices such as palliative care, and as I said, the majority of New Zealanders are unaware that this isn't about turning off life support, and that's also what our Votesafe.nz quiz has shown. We've had about 150,000 respondents on that, and the vast majority have no idea that this is about a lethal dose.
Well, this is the opportunity, I suppose, to inform people along those lines. Jack, if I can bring you in on this one, because there's a statement which you made, which I think is worth unpacking. I read somewhere you said, under this legislation, you believe that no more would die, but less would suffer. What do you mean by that?
Just what it says. People are dying anyway, and the assisted dying is, I know there's a 6-month lead-in, but they don't have it straight away. They have it towards the time when they're obviously going to die. And they're dying anyway, but some of them have major suffering. Now, palliative care and hospice care is very good on the whole. New Zealand, it's a bit patchy, but it's very good on the whole. But there are a percentage quite clearly who don't receive relief from suffering. That can be pain, but it's often a lot of other things. It can be breathlessness, it can be hallucinations, it can be vomiting feces, it can be hallucinations and fatigue, and a whole lot of things can make an end very miserable. And
these people are dying anyway. I suppose this is your point,
yes,
that this is
dying
an opportunity
anyway.
to say, if we
Question, how
intervene
you
a little bit earlier, would their last few days or hours be less traumatic for them or their family members?
It could be a few weeks, and it could be while they're still conscious, and they can talk about it with their friends and relatives, whānau, and discuss it all.
Well,
and
we'll go into that particular issue a little bit deeper in a moment, but just wanting to get your feedback on this as well. And Jack makes a good point that the current system of end-of-life care is underfunded and under-regulated, some would say. We need to have a conversation about how we can do end-of-life choice better.
Yeah, there's a few points there that are really interesting. So first of all, it's not obvious that a person would choose assisted dying necessarily at the end of their 6-month journey.
Yep.
If they had a fear of pain or suffering, they might very well choose it straight after they're diagnosed and given that 3 to 6 month prognosis. And Jack's quite right. Palliative care is patchy at best in New Zealand.
Yep.
We've got lack of access to good palliative care for a lot of rural New Zealand, as well as a lack of equal access to palliative care for a majority of our Māori population in New Zealand, who are already disproportionately affected by lack of equal access to care. And then on top of that, you've got the fact that palliative care and hospice has to self-fund itself 50%. The government pays for half of the bills, but they have to get out there and fundraise the rest, which is, just unacceptable as well. But the fact that that palliative care isn't able to be accessed means that those people don't really have a choice. It's basically either drive a few hours to get some decent palliative care, or potentially choose the assisted dying option, and that's not a fair choice.
So you're in favour of end-of-life choices, not this particular act named?
Well, the other thing I'd like to say is that whilst I understand Jack's sentiment that no fewer will die, but less will suffer, from my own personal experience, one of the main motivating reasons for me being in this conversation is the experience with my stepmother. And so she was given a terminal prognosis of 3 to 6 months to live.
Yeah.
We grieved, we were shocked. I remember walking along the beach and just with such a heavy heart, and just like my world had ended. She was a huge rock in my life, and I loved her very much. And this realization that shivers within 3 to 6 months, she's not going to be here, just about, But interestingly, she was able to access some trial treatment that she qualified for, and it went pretty well, and she was actually able to live for another 3.5 years. Now, she was the type of person that didn't like being a burden on others. I never once heard her complain, even though she did suffer at times. But her life could have been very easily cut short. And so I don't necessarily, whilst I think it's a great catchphrase, it's not necessarily accurate.
And we do all have those personal stories that will motivate us to the view in which we have.
Can I just butt in there? It's Jack speaking.
Yes.
First of all, in places where they've legalised assisted dying, palliative care has improved. And in some places, there's actually a lot more money being put into hospice and palliative care.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that if a person has been given a 6-month prognosis, there'll be quite a bit of error in that. But as they progress, if they get better, they won't want assisted dying. If they improve and if they live for 2 or 3 years, that's.
And to be fair, would it be say if this does pass? I mean, I know it's become an act, but if this referenda passes, a lot more pressure on physicians to get that 6-month diagnosis right because life depends on it.
Well, they can't get it right.
It won't actually matter too much because what happens is that you've got to be majorly incapacitated. That's in the Act.
We'll get into the details of the Act in just a moment, but just wanting to take a break. Thank you again to all of our contributors. Eloise, we've got some comments coming through on social media as well.
Yeah, we actually had a question that Jack sort of already answered. So...
You're ahead of the curve on this one, Jack.
And another, I guess, comment from Ethan, no too many other hidden factors are about it. It will cause more harm than good. I do see the other side of it for people who are suffering, which I think could be a different discussion and something done about it, but not a complete law change.
Well, lots of different views out there. We welcome yours, but we'd certainly encourage you to listen into this panel. There may be views in this panel that you don't agree with, but take the time to listen to other people's points of view as you make an informed and prayerful decision with this referenda. More from the panel coming up in just a moment. There we go. Thank you, guys. We are into the commercial break, but hey, again, thank you to people on the live stream. Haven't our panelists behaved themselves well? Look, I know that there are personal stories behind this, and Jack, you will have seen a lot of people suffer under your care. So I know that this isn't an imaginary theoretical argument. So yeah, again, thank you for your points, and thank you for your passion, and thank you for your grace in behaving yourselves. So commercial break. We'll be back with more in a moment, and just to let you know. Eloise, is there more from social media? Do you want to kick off with one at the top, or just leave that? I know you're doing filtering, right? I was just going to read this
out. Probably, I was like, I can just mention this during a break.
Yeah.
Nadine said she saw Caralise speak about a week ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really good.
Did she buy her book, though? I mean, that's what you want to know, Caralise, right?
She said, I learned so much, and it really opened my eyes to see what the Act is really all about. I'm so thankful for research and information. And she has a very good perspective.
Okay.
I was like, oh, that's a nice
that's nice. Yeah, that's cool. In the next section, so between the end of this ad break and the next ad break, so this is the middle one of 3 12-minute blocks or thereabouts that we're doing, I am wanting to, Caralise, I'll throw to you as the first question, but we are, what have I done wrong?
No, I was just scrolling.
Oh, okay, it's just scrolling. Sorry. Eloise was freaking me out there for a moment. But looking at the faith perspective, because, I mean, this is the lens through a lot of the listeners and viewers will be seeing things that their viewpoint will be coloured by their life experience, but also a faith perspective. So that is where we're going on this, and all three of you will have the opportunity to respond to questions along those sorts of lines.
Okay.
Thank you.
So is that back into program or the other way around?
Program.
Okay, we are 25 seconds away from live again. Thank you very much. Eloise, we'll go to you first. I'll go to you first.
Okay.
You are with the panel on Rema and Life FM, and also, of course, on live stream as well. Eloise, I'm just going to out you in front of our audience here. This is your last panel, not because you're sick of working with me, that's just a coincidence. But actually, I would say, to be fair, that we've got about 20% of your undivided attention at the moment. The rest of it may be slightly wedding-brained. Is that unfair, Eloise,
No,
that I said that?
I'm trying to stay focused for the panel today. That is why I'm away next week.
Exactly. You're not here next week because you've got married. The wedding happening this weekend?
No, so next Friday.
Next Friday?
Yes.
Wow. That's kind of exciting. So we need to pray for good weather and everything.
Yeah, yes, please.
Photos on Facebook, that would be very good indeed. Now, enough of weddings and back to assisted dying. That is the topic today, looking in particular at the End of Life Choice Act and the referenda on that topic. Some more comments from people watching the live stream, Eloise?
Yeah, we got quite a few comments just then, but one I thought we could start with is by this person. They've got a joint name, so maybe they share Facebook.
A husband and wife thing, you get used to it.
Yeah, Anna and Brett. I struggle to reconcile the role of medical staff in assisted dying with my belief in what the Bible says, that God will hold everyone to account for taking the life of another person.
Okay, well, we will get to that in many different ways, but Caralise, you have talked to people on various views on this debate, and given the platform that we're broadcasting on, in your research on this topic, how much do you think faith is a motivator for the views that people form?
Oh, look, there is, without a doubt, an underlying value system that is at play in many that approach this topic from a religious perspective. The value of life, the belief that God is the author and the finisher of life. So that does work in a number of people's positions on this. But what I found with those that I interviewed, a number of people from a variation of faith or belief backgrounds fall on both sides of the category. So you've got, Buddhists, atheists, Muslims, Catholics, Christians, all either opposed to this or in favour. So there are many of us that approach this not only with a religious perspective, but from a societal perspective in this conversation.
Certainly some of the feedback that we've got, even saying that we're preparing for the debate, there are people with strong views on it that come from a religious point of view that see that there's only one truth here, and why are we talking to anybody else on this? The flip side of that, though, is I know that for those who are opposed to the legislation, it's almost a case where you need to obscure your religious views so as not to be written off as a bunch of evangelical zealots. Henoch, has that been your experience with the campaign that you've been running?
Interesting. So Votesafe is represented by almost 200 lawyers and about 1,700 doctors. There's no sort of consensus on faith.
Yeah.
In fact, our spokespeople, the local stories that we've presented on the website that you can watch as well as Claire Freeman, our advocate that's been on our flyers, a lot of these folks don't come at all from a faith perspective.
I'm just going from
an atheistic background.
This is the criticism that often comes up on social media.
Yeah,
who cares about their point of view? Their imaginary friend is Jesus.
Yeah, it's a great way to try and shut down conversation and not actually listen to the actual logic, and it's quite disingenuous, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one doctor interviewed, Dr. Sinead Donnelly, that I interviewed, was on a Q&A panel. She just called it for what it is. It's religious bigotry, and we have to actually be open to listening and reasoning, no matter what your perspective. It's important to give people the benefit of honouring each other's opinion and realising that there's depth to arguments in this conversation.
And Jack, wanting to bring you in on this one, Christians certainly don't have an exclusive view on this. There are churchgoers who are in favour of the legislation, yourself included.
No, yeah, absolutely. You might be interested to know that there's just been a survey in Queensland of churchgoers, and the high majority of people were in favour of the legislation which is being proposed there, which is similar to here. 79% of Anglican approved. These are churchgoers. 60% of Catholic even, and so to think that all Christians, or the majority of Christians, are against assisted dying is wrong. And
Yeah,
there has been a survey in New Zealand which has suggested something similar.
I'm certainly not going to write them off because they're Christians, but maybe Australians. I don't know. That sticks in the craw a little bit on that one. Hey, Henoch, your thoughts on this? The argument in favour of the Act is often framed in terms of compassion, a compassionate response to suffering loved ones. I mean, compassion has always been a key part of the Christian faith. This is what Jesus taught. You can see the argument to say Christ followers should be compassionate, therefore support the Act. What's your thoughts?
That's a hard question. I've never actually had that one before. For me, I come at this purely from a perspective of risks to the vulnerable.
Okay.
From my experience with my mum with terminal illness, my stepmum, from some mental illness within the wider family, and from my experience as a caregiver with those with disabilities. And so we're looking at it. The interesting thing is that most people come at this conversation, and even in the media, it's framed as the euthanasia law, or do you support euthanasia?
Yeah.
Even Vote Compass used a similar question in its survey. But this isn't actually about euthanasia. This is actually about, is this law that we've got in front of us the right law to legislate assisted dying in New Zealand? And are the safeguards there? Now, we've got serious concerns with regards to lack of coercion, lack of assessment for coercion, lack of mental health support, no attempted treatment being required, so it doesn't even have to be a last resort, no loved ones needing to be informed, and that's especially problematic for young people, and no physical pain even being required. You'd assume that this is all about people in excruciating pain, but as Jack pointed out, pain and suffering can be very separate from pain.
Different ways of defining that. And don't worry, we will get to the specifics of the Act and what it says and what it doesn't say. But Caralise, your thoughts on this? As we saw when this was debated in Parliament, every MP whichever way they voted, they had a story of how their experience with a loved one dying and suffering, that is the reason that they voted either yes or no. There's stories on both sides of the House, there's stories on both sides of the debate as well.
Yeah, I mean, even if I can, take the privilege of going back to that question you threw to Henoch. Look, a number of those that I interviewed, including the Nathaniel Centre's spokesman, Dr. John Kleinsman, David Richmond, who represented a Christian perspective. Look, many people come at this with that belief Jesus was compassionate. Wouldn't this be the compassionate choice? I mean, one of something that David Richmond sort of threw into this conversation was like Jesus, as he walked in the earth, as the Bible sort of records his historic actions. Look, he didn't actually kill anyone. In fact, he raised people from the dead. That was one of his primary ministries, and himself was raised from the dead. So to say that Jesus would consider compassionate assisted dying as in David Richmond's terms, poor theology. So interesting in that element. But yeah, you're right. MPs have approached this topic. Many of us approach it with those personal stories. I think we also bring our fear to the conversation, that fear of what if we get to this point in life and it's horrible.
Jack, I do want to get your comment on this aspect though, because I know there's a lot of concern that as people vote, that they will be voting in particular about their fear of suffering and dying themselves. It's difficult not to put ourselves into that situation and say, what would I do? Projecting yourself into that space to make the decision, that's slightly problematic and isn't really what we're voting for, is it?
Oh, well, the essence of the Act is to allow patients approaching death with unrelievable suffering to request help to die with the help of a medical practitioner. What's wrong with that? It's about compassion. It's about...
But if we're projecting our own fears of suffering and dying into that space, isn't the concern that we're, I suppose, voting within self-interest rather than, and we will get to this, that consideration of the vulnerable who are in that life and death situation, that we're making our choice removed from that on behalf of them?
Not necessarily, because a lot of us who are advocating for this Act would probably have a different sort of death, and maybe palliative care would be fine. But I, and I suppose you can only understand it in personal ways.
Yeah.
If I have unrelievable suffering of enormous amount, which can't be relieved by normal palliative care, and it's quite clear that this happens. It's a compassionate. It becomes a compassion to other people as well as perhaps yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
it may not be for yourself. It's for everybody, and it gives a chance for New Zealanders to have a peaceful death.
Caralise, you wanted to comment on that as well?
Sure,
With their
yeah.
family while they're still alive.
I mean, with due respect, I agree. That's the intention of this law, but that's where we have to get on those finer details. I mean, there's no requirement under this legislation to speak to a palliative care specialist. There's no requirement under this legislation for someone, that patient, to pursue treatment. So, look.
Could I talk to that?
Could I just,
Okay,
first of all, just clarify
I'm
something?
just going to jump into here because, look, I don't want to get bogged down in the details at this point. So if we will get to some of that in just a moment, but I just want to, let's keep it civil. We will take a question if there's more on social media in just a moment, but just if I could have a quick answer from each one of you, because there's the topic and then there's the process. Henoch, first to you, is a referenda the best way of making this decision? What's your view?
Well, it's the first time that the New Zealand public has ever been asked to have a referendum on an act. That's a finished piece of legislation that's ready to go.
Is it the right instrument in your view?
Well, it's expecting every New Zealander to be a legal expert. Now, we've had legal analysis from, as I said, about 200 lawyers that have identified 35 fatal flaws in the Act.
So
and
I'm sure we could get lawyers on the other side as well.
Well, there hasn't
there's
actually
plenty
been
of
any
lawyers on the
consensus
other
of
side,
group
you know.
that have actually
It's
formed a
written by
group to...
lawyers.
We're getting a bit of crosstalk there, Jack. We'll go to you in just a moment. So you would say yes or no. Is the referenda the best way of doing this? Sorry to break it down to a yes or no.
It doesn't
You're
matter
asking me.
in a sense that it is what
Jack-
we've got.
Okay, that's
No,
what we've
no,
got. Jack,
no.
to you now. Do you think the referenda is the best way of making this decision?
No, it's not. It's a stupid way, really, because I agree with Henoch that most people won't have read the Act.
Yep.
And there's a lot of ignorance, including amongst doctors.
Caralise,
And,
so we're in agreement on this one. At least it's good to find some common ground. Caralise, your thoughts on it? Referenda, everybody gets to have our say. Isn't this democracy? Is this the best way to talk about a complicated issue like this?
It's an opportunity for a conversation. So there's benefits, but I think this is one of the number of problems with this Act as it went through the parliamentary process. No recommendations made by the Justice Select Committee to significantly change the Act, despite having a nearly 40,000 submissions, more than 90% in opposition.
We will get to some of those details in the time that we have left in just a moment. But firstly, back to you, Eloise. Any other comments on social media at this point?
We do have a comment from Marnie, but it seems like we may have to talk about that.
Well,
after
that
the
is
break.
coming up. Don't go away. We conclude our conversation on the End of Life Choice Act referenda back with the panel in just a moment.
We want to get to the details.
We don't. I know, guys. Sorry. I know you've got.
It's all good.
Yeah. This is welcome to my world. This is the nature of what we do.
It's tricky. Eh?
We ice skate lightly over some very thick ice here, and we don't get into the depths that often. Sorry, this is you guys are behaving yourself generally. Jack, you're feeling that you're heard. You're getting your view across. You're okay there. A slight disadvantage.
Yes, I feel an overwhelming compulsion to contradict one or two
No,
things.
this is why we invited you, Jack. You're most welcome to do that. Now, we are jumping into some of the details of this, and we will do some of the issues to do with specifics to do with this legislation. That will happen between the commercial break and 12 midday. We need to finish at 12. Otherwise, I turn back into a pumpkin and it's game over. However...
Are you in a dress? No.
Well,
Phew.
am I? It is Frocktober, isn't it? Anyway. So, yeah, we will get as much as possible covered, and I want to give you equal opportunity, but at the end of the day...
You're going to have to call it.
We will
Go
need to
for it,
call it.
Andrew.
So, but yeah, again, thank you for your cooperation and playing nicely. We are
And just one clarity on the Act as well, if you wouldn't mind, that I was trying to make earlier.
10 seconds. We are back live.
Thanks.
You are back with the panel, Andrew Urquhart and Eloise Packham. Great throw to the ad break tease, Eloise. It was a question coming in. We're on the edge of our seats. Did you want to present that to the panel now?
Yeah, Marnie has said, one of my concerns is that there seems to be no focus on how accurate the judgment of the doctor who advises a patient has less than 6 months to live. Many believe on specialists, ETC can give this judgment for people ready in palliative care, but it seems a doctor can diagnose this on one appointment, and that diagnosis could be without a lot of evidence. Can you talk about that?
Jack, you are, in fact, the doctor in the house at the moment. If it was me, I would want a second opinion, nothing personal, but your view as a retired medical professional. What's your thoughts on the question?
Well, the Act allows for a second opinion. Are you talking about the accuracy of diagnosis?
Exactly. Yeah, people are making life and death decisions
okay.
on.
Let me take you through it. The patient has been given a diagnosis, and they've probably been, say, they're cancer, which is most cases. They've been to oncologists and all sorts of things, and then they're given a time scale of what is likely, but they don't have assisted dying at that point. They might raise it with the first doctor, and then as they go on, it might be a few weeks before actual death when they deteriorated in a major way, and they're having unrelievable suffering as well, and so basically, in a way, they're approaching death reasonably fast, so it doesn't matter what their diagnosis is if you want to.
Well, as long as it's accurate, I suppose. And Henoch, that was your lived experience on this one. Do you believe that there are the safeguards in case a diagnosis is wrong?
Well, we already know that. So there's two things. There's diagnosis and there's prognosis. So one is the condition and the other one is how much time you've got left.
Yeah.
So it's common, or it's not uncommon, put it that way, for doctors to actually get diagnosis completely wrong. And it's a real risk. And you can be told that you're terminal and you're not. The other real risk is prognosis. And I talked about my experience with my stepmum, 3 to 6 months to live, 3.5 years later. Now, there's also no requirement for the person to wait until closer to the end, as Jack's suggesting. And that is one of the real flaws in this Act. But just on Jack's previous point about unrelievable suffering, the actual Act doesn't actually use that language. The actual Act that I've got in front of me here says unbearable suffering that cannot be treated in a way that the person finds tolerable. So the actual what we're looking at there is an actual it's my own truth. It's almost a postmodern interpretation of suffering. It could be my loneliness. It could be that my son is overseas. Yes, there has to be physical decline, and yes, there has to be a terminal diagnosis. But that unbearable suffering doesn't have to be related to pain. It could literally be psychological or depression or mental health, which are all treatable.
Too much subjective terminology for your bank of lawyers, perhaps?
Very much so. And even the doctor's requirement to detect for coercion and bullying and pressure is simply this very vague phrase of to do their best. Now, the bar there is so low, it's basically not even a legal requirement to hop over that line.
We're all hoping that we're doing our best to look after people.
Am I allowed to butt in there?
Well, Jack, I wanted to ask you a specific question based on what Henoch says, if that's okay, but you can answer that as you see fit. It seems to come down to balancing individual freedoms, choices and rights with the societal duty to protect the vulnerable. As a medical professional, I suppose you're making those, medical professionals will be making those sorts of choices. What is the duty to protect the vulnerable, but also giving individual freedom of choice and informed consent?
Yes, I think you need to point out that there's been no study which has shown coercion as a problem. And
it's pretty hard to show after they're dead, though, isn't it?
Several studies which have shown that the people who are supposed to be vulnerable are less vulnerable than and the ones that take assisted dying are less vulnerable than.
I mean, with respect, Jack, there are studies and counter studies on every point within this, so we won't have time to
You
get into
show me
all.
a study on coercion.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if I can just jump in there, some of the international research that I have done and interviewed a researcher that's looked at this for 10 years, if we even just look within Oregon, the motivational reasons why people are choosing assisted dying or assisted suicide specifically in Oregon, 59% of people that are choosing this say it's because they feel they are a burden on caregivers, family or friends.
It's not coercion.
Oh, well, okay.
So coercion is a form of pressure. There's different ways to measure it. So look, there's no
I do need to cut into this because
Sure.
research and counter research,
I know data
they kind of
can
cancel
be-
each other out
Oh.
and may not help the listener make an informed choice at the end of this. Wanting to raise a point, and this is a general open area. There were a lot of submissions to the Select Committee from the disabled community, and for people in the disabled community that have concerns about what this act and some of the questions it raises says about their own personal value and their quality of life. Henoch, do you want to go first on that one, or I mean, open mic, whoever wants to comment, just not all at once.
Yeah, sure. So I've had the personal opportunity to interview many people with disabilities around the country as well as terminal illnesses. And one thing that we think as the listener, we assume that there's this really clear, bright line between terminal illness and disability, but there's not. Once someone gets a terminal illness, they're likely to decline physically, end up in a wheelchair or other similar disabilities, and essentially become part of the disabilities community. So the choices that those people make with regards to the end of life actually impact the disabled community hugely. And also, it comes down to a value thing. If we've got someone saying, "Look, I don't want to be in a position where someone has to help wipe me when I'm toileted," it actually impacts on the value and the dignity
But it's
of
not
people
about
with
that. It's
disability.
specifically about terminal illness. So,
of course, but
yeah,
that can be part of the physical decline, and that can be just like fear and
Can I
pain.
comment on that?
Yes, you're most welcome to step in there, Jack.
It's a
Yep.
devaluing thing, really.
The Act specifically excludes anybody who simply has disability. Now, if the person has a terminal illness as well as disability, who's going to take away their right to make their own choice? Now, this is like people say, discrimination against disabled. This would be just discrimination against disabled. Now,
I totally agree with Jack that you can't.
You
You must have terminal illness.
You've got Claire Freeman on your pamphlet, Henoch. She's not eligible and never has been eligible.
Okay, again, not wanting to get lost in the trees because we've just got a couple of minutes on this one. We'll just do a quick round again. Henoch, I'll start with you. Yes, there is an act that has passed. There was a process that we went through with Select Committee. There were some amendments that were made. In your view, is it better than what it was? Is it a better version of what was initially proposed? Were there gains that were made in that process?
Ever so slightly, although I think Jack would disagree. But the question that we've got to ask ourselves is this law safe? Is this law safe beyond the reasonable shadow of a doubt? Will wrongful deaths happen or not? And are we prepared for that? So good law needs to balance autonomy, and it needs to balance protection of the citizens. At the moment, this law is very much geared towards giving autonomous choices to certain members of society, whilst very much lacking in protections for vulnerable members of society.
Jack, to get your comment on this in particular, do you think that the amendments involve too much compromise, or is this a step in the right direction from your point of view?
Oh, you mean the amendments in Parliament? I think the amendments actually that David Seymour brought in made it a lot more restrictive. For instance, it took out certain things.
Are you happy with the amendments that were made, or do you think it's a compromise?
It was very much a compromise and had to be made politically because, for instance, New Zealand First wouldn't wouldn't vote for it unless
and hence we have a referenda. Thanks for New Zealand First for that particular situation. Now, we are coming down to the final seconds. A record number of select committee submissions, rigorous debate, amendments were made to the bill. Safeguards were put in place, some would say. Is this a suitable compromise? Yeah, I mean, you would have a different point of view. But is this the compromise position? Is this the world in which we live? We're not going to agree on all the details, but we've gone through the process. Is this a suitable compromise in your view, Caralise?
I mean, absolutely. In moments like this, I think we need to listen to experts. And quite frankly, the majority of experts that are speaking out are in opposition to this piece of legislation. Look, in principle, they may agree with euthanasia, but this legislation they have major concerns with.
Well, the experts, the lawyers, the doctors, the panellists, the people with horrifically sad stories, they have had their say. Now it's up to us. We get to have a vote, yes or no, to the End of Life Choice Act referenda. Do make an informed and prayerful decision. But to all of the panellists, kia ora, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you,
Jack.
Thank you very much for that. We did run out of time. There was more that we could have gone into it, but you all behaved so nicely. And I think that was a really helpful conversation for people that may have different points of view to yourselves. And thank you for what you've done. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to people on the live stream. Sorry you didn't get a final question at the end, but
Yeah, there was quite a few questions, but someone
We can
even
go
said
on and-
seems like we may have needed a